Hello, folks. I am Adrian Scott. I'm going to talk about what anti-fragile is and also about what it has to do with profitability from volatility. The word anti-fragile was created by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and he started off looking at we have this word fragile, which refers to things that break, right? So if we have this teacup and we drop it, what happens? It falls into pieces. So this volatility of falling down and encountering rapid deceleration when it hits the ground, that is fragile. It loses from volatility. Now, what a lot of people think of when you say, well, what would the opposite of fragility be? Be something that a lot of people think of robustness or resilience. But that is actually just that you're plain and you can handle volatility. So if we have, for example, bamboo, when wind comes and hits hard against the bamboo, it just comes back, right? So the bamboo is robust or resilient, but that is not the opposite of fragile. So fragile stuff loses from volatility. So how about anti-fragile things benefiting from volatility? That would be the opposite of losing from volatility, benefiting from volatility. Now, everybody knows what this is, right? Of course, it is a hydra, a Greek mythological creature with multiple heads. Now, what happens if we take a sword and we go and we chop off one of these heads of the hydra? What happens is the hydra grows back 2 heads where there used to be 1 head, and now it has 4 heads. So the hydra is something that benefits from volatility. Now, what does this have to do with us and investing and profiting and portfolios and so on? Well, gee, it would kind of be nice if we had portfolios that benefited from volatility instead of just staying even, like the bamboo, or losing, like the teacup. Now, just a couple more notes on anti-fragile. A couple more examples. Weightlifting. So in weightlifting, we lift a heavy weight that maybe we're not ready for or not used to, and we can end up with micro tears in the muscle. But that volatility, that extra weight, ends up helping us build stronger muscles and be able to lift larger weights in the future. So that can be anti-fragile up to a point. Another example is, I would say, wave generation, power generation machines that generate power from waves. You may have heard of these. These can operate in the ocean, and that the waves of the ocean, which are not always equal, right? They're volatile. You get big waves sometimes, just as any surfer knows. So those machines can generate power from that volatile motion. Just to give a few more words, what do we mean by volatility? It just means stuff that goes up and down, right? It moves around. And in addition to volatility, you can think of this as stressors, disorder, randomness. So something that's anti-fragile can like uncertainty, can like risk. It benefits from those things. So it's kind of a very special thing to be anti-fragile. And just because something is anti-fragile within a certain range of motion doesn't mean it's anti-fragile forever. So if we have a wave power generation machine, that's only going to handle up to certain kind of waves, right? If we have a portfolio approach in the market and the exchange gets obliterated by some massive destructive device, that might knock out everything. And so we don't necessarily require that something be anti-fragile for an unlimited range. It might be anti-fragile up to a certain range. Same thing with lifting weights, right? We might be able to lift a weight up to a certain point to help us build more muscle capacity, but that doesn't mean you can just throw any kind of weight at us and we'll benefit from it. Another interesting detail is to consider the individual's perspective on this versus the group perspective, which is sometimes called the ensemble. So if I'm an entrepreneur, I can be in a very fragile position. I might be very dependent on raising funding or customers. An entrepreneur could have most of their revenue coming from one customer and so on. So an individual entrepreneur, an individual startup could be rather fragile. At the same time, the overall system or group of startups could be very anti-fragile because it responds to new opportunities, is able to create new startups. Just like our Hydra was able to create a new head, the overall group or system can fire up new startups and look at tackling new opportunities, new changes, new stressors on the ecosystem. So we talked about the difference between fragile, robust, remember fragile teacup, robust bamboo, and anti-fragile, the Hydra. And we spoke about individual versus group perspective on whether something is anti-fragile. So let's bring that now to talk about profiting from volatility, profiting from anti-fragile nature. If we go into a market investing and we only go long, so we are reliant on the market going up, right? And so what happens if the market goes up really quickly? Well, we still benefit, so that's kind of nice. So in that direction, it's good. But if the market goes down rapidly, and they tend to go down rapidly more than they go up, velocity-wise, then we're that investment is going to go down, and that's not a great thing. So that can be fragile. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a way to not just lose money or stay even, but also benefit if markets are volatile in the negative direction and not just the positive direction? So that's the overall idea about profiting from anti-fragile, being anti-fragile in the markets and in investments. There's a couple of ways that are examples on how to do that. One is to have an algorithmic approach, and that's what I work with a lot, is algorithms that will benefit from this volatility of markets. Another component of an investment strategy that could be anti-fragile can be to use options. So if you buy, for example, a put on a market and the market goes down, you are limited in how much you might lose, and then you have significant upside in terms of how that option can grow in value. And so that's one component of building an anti-fragile approach that can profit from volatility. Another example with the algorithms are algorithms that look for significant movements and look to capture those significant movements, both in the negative direction and in the positive direction in markets. Those are a few thoughts. I hope you're now a little more familiar with anti-fragile versus fragile and robust or resilient. Remember, the opposite of fragile is not robust or resilient, it's anti-fragile. We spoke about the idea of individual versus the group perspective on, the individual may be fragile and the group may be anti-fragile. So if we are individuals or individual organizations, we want to figure out how to move from fragile to anti-fragile. And then lastly, we spoke how to profit from this when we apply this concept of anti-fragility to the markets and to investing. I've got more good stuff on the way. Please subscribe to my channel. Once you click on subscribe, also click the little bell icon beside it, so that you get notifications when I do, on rare occasions, post new videos. And would love to read your comments, so let me know what you think.